Hi, everybody. Welcome to Steps to Success's third Educational Equity Society Forum. My name is Juan Cantu, and I'm the new Executive Director of Steps to Success. I hope that most of you know about our work, but for those who don't know about Steps to Success, we're a Brookline-based nonprofit organization that works to close the academic and career opportunity gap for children from low-income families, specifically those who live in the Brookline Housing Authority. We provide out-of-school time and enrichment programming for more than 300 students every year, starting in the fourth grade all the way through college graduation. All of our programs are free of charge, including after-school enrichment, access to summer camps, career and college readiness, and college enrollment and retention support. I joined STEPS because I relate really closely with the youth we serve. I was born and raised in South Texas, and I'm the son of Mexican immigrants. I grew up as a migrant worker, traveling from Texas to Iowa every summer. At age 13, I joined my family and other extended family members working in the cornfields alongside folks. And my family really instilled the importance of education in me. They said that was a path out of working in the fields when we were 40, 50, 60 years old. My parents loved me to death. They supported me in all the ways they could, but they did not know how to navigate the educational system, especially once it got to college applications. And that's similar to a lot of our family members that we support in STEPS. They really want to support their kids and children, but sometimes they don't know how to do that, and that's where we come in. I relied on teachers and advisors and mentors to really support me in high school. And I was able to get into Harvard and have been in Boston ever since. And it's funny when I mentioned to my parents that I got to Harvard, they didn't know what that was. And that just shows the lack of access to knowledge in college applications that they had. But without my mentors and advocates, I would not be where I am right now. And that's why I do this work. My calling has been to continue to support students and young people who share similar backgrounds to me, students of color, low income, the first in their family to go to college. So I'm just thrilled to say that STEPS is the right place to continue to do that work. We're really proud of the work we do with our students. About 16% of low-income students nationwide are on track to graduate college within 8 years. And more than 90% of our students are on track to graduate within 4 to 6. So the work we're doing with our students is really impactful and has shown really great results. And the success has everything to do with our unique model, our close working relationship with the schools and with the housing authority, and its long-term investment in our students starting in the fourth grade. What we need is support from folks, from the schools, from the housing authority, from folks like you who are attending these forums. And it's been immensely helpful for everybody that you are here. Thank you. These forums are an opportunity for folks like you to get together, learn more about the issues we care about our community, such as educational equity, hence the name of our forum. Tonight, you're going to hear from Michée Mande, incredible STEPS alum, who is now a producer at KCRA in Sacramento, and Miriam Aschkenasy, Select Board Member and Program Director of Institutional Anti-Racism and Accountability Project at Harvard Kennedy, who will be discussing how anti-racism can be an effective tool for educators and adults to support students in addition to their experiences in Brookline. After hearing from our presenters, there's going to be plenty of time for questions and answers. Thank you to Wegmans for sponsoring our forum. We really appreciate it. They have been kind to us, and I shop there a little bit too much sometimes, but thank you again to Wegmans. And now please welcome Miriam and Michée.
Racist is so deeply connected to our history. For me, that was the real pivot. And so I ended up becoming a program manager for this nascent program at the Kennedy School, which we have now grown exponentially, and now I'm the program director. So that's a little bit about my how I got where I am. One of the things that we do, and I want to be very careful about the framing of the work that I do, because Harvard, and I won't put Juan on the spot, but Harvard is a very racist place. It's a very sexist place. It's a very racist place. And there is an irony that we are doing this kind of work and research out of a place that is still really struggling with its own identity in terms of its anti-racism work. And I'll give you, I think it's worthwhile to give you a good example of a, um, Ivy League university that has done the work. If you want to look at Brown University, when Ruth Simmons was the president of Brown University, she really said, we are going to be an anti-racist institution. And they looked very carefully at all of their policies and their practices and their history, and how that they needed to not only change those things, but how to proactively create equity. And they have an excellent, they really make sure students who are coming in understand the history of Brown and its role in slavery, the history of Brown and its role in perpetuating racist structures. And then they have all sorts of programs to support and make students of color um, be an integral part of the fabric at Brown. And I know that not just because we've studied it and looked at it, because we've met Ruth Simmons and heard her talk. My niece went to Brown, so I saw it really in action. So we know what it looks like, and we know, so I can tell you Harvard is not there yet, right? But what we do as as a program is we actually look at organizations like Brown and say, okay, you claim to be anti-racist. What's that mean? Because I think it's equally important. Not only do we have to hold organizations that don't do anti-racism work and equity work to the fire to do that work, but organizations that claim that they do that work, we have to know what that looks like. And we have to have some framing, how to say, is this working, isn't this working? And the reality is there's very little of that framing that's been formalized. And so what we do, it's very boring. We actually look at how do we develop those frames, how do we hold organizations and institutions accountable. Yeah, how does that relate to education? I think Brown is a good example, but I think if we bring it back down to the K through 12, and obviously that's really important to me. For those of you who don't know, I have a son at the Brookline High School. I have a daughter at Heath. To me, those are, and both my kids are kids of color. To me, it is, you know, creating a space for them, not just to feel safe and comfortable and supported, but to really learn history and to really have a toolbox by which to have these conversations with other people. I think understanding how structures and systems affect their lives and the lives of their friends and neighbors and how we got here. I think that's a really important part of our educational system. Oh, hi, dog. And and I feel very lucky at Heath. I think we have a principal who really works to have an anti-racist elementary and middle school. But I think the really important takeaway is it is work. It has to be intentional, and it has to be everyday work. I'm going to tell a funny story, and then I will turn it over to Michée. I always say uh, I'm a racist, right? I was raised in a racist culture with racist structures, policies, and practices. I benefited from it. I benefit from it from to this day. And I open up conversations like that because it's not a judgment call. It's not a judgment. It just is. And if we can't start with that, then we can't have a real honest discussion about how to be anti-racist and how to address structures. And one day my son was in a carpool on the way back from baseball, and they started talking about this, and he yells out, "My mom's a racist." I got a phone call from that parent, thankfully. And I said, "Let me explain." But I think that's a great place for us to start these conversations. This isn't a judgment. And if we can't have those conversations, how do we expect our kids to have those conversations? Right? I'm so glad that my son actually felt like he could say that. It needed context, but that was really important. So I think I overspent my time. I apologize. I'm going to turn it over to Michée.
Really well said, Miriam. Hi, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Michée Mande. I am a STEPS alum, now thankfully UMass Amherst alum. I am out in Sacramento working for KCRA as a promotions producer. And but before this, all my life was spent in Massachusetts. I grew up in Brookline with a family that very much so was on that poverty line. We didn't live in public housing, and that's something that oddly we took pride in, but we were very much so part of the demographic that wasn't as affluent as many people grow up to be in Brookline. And I went through the whole K-12 system at Lincoln, went to Brookline High, and then, like I said, went to UMass Amherst. And through Brookline High School, I learned so many things when it comes to education, because Brookline does have such a great education. But something that I always felt was lacking was an understanding of people's differences and how it affects how they learn, and just the experiences and the ways they walk through education. And I always felt like Brookline scratched at the surface of trying to be anti-racist and putting in these policies that brought in inclusion. But like I said, we're just scratching at the surface. And the conversations we had while I was still at Brookline High School didn't really prepare me for what I would be facing and have still to face in the real world. And so through going to college, I studied communication, and that really helped me understand how people communicate, of course, but also how people could have the ideas that they have, having grown up how they grew up. And through Brookline High School, I was in programs like, of course, STEPS and African American Latino scholars that really helped me solidify a sense of identity within myself, but also opened up my eyes to how much more we could be doing within the school systems and within the high school to college pipeline. And that's why I've always been so willing to speak at these events, to give my opinion about having gone through the SEP system, because there are so many of my counterparts, or not counterparts, so many of my colleagues, Black and Brown students, who, although provided the resources and provided certain reaches to these programs that promise a betterment, they, because of certain biases, because of certain just narratives that surround these programs, did not reach out or did not achieve or get everything that could come from that. And I feel like that itself doesn't have to do with the person, but has to do with the environment that's cultivated. And so that's why I'm here today, to talk about my experience and how it brought me to where I am, and answer any questions about what I think could be done or anything like that. So I'm very happy to be here and very excited to meet a majority of you guys.
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you, Michée. So I think the next part of the forum agenda is going to be a Q&A between conversation essentially between Michée and Miriam. I think you all have the questions on you, but okay, cool. So I know Michée, you're up first.
These questions are for Miriam. Miriam, I'd like to know, what is anti-racist education? And while you're answering that, please also think about how can we talk about the hijacking of critical race theory in our current educational systems?
Great. Thank you. And I put a little note for myself, just this, my little asterisk is, we're talking about race today and anti-racism, but I want to be very careful that I don't equate, and that we don't equate class and race. There are intersections, and the intersectionality is really important, but they are also separate. With that said, to me, what is an anti-racist education? You know, an anti-racist education is an education that has a lens on history and policy, and how we got here. We live in a very white-centric, everything is white-centric, right? So when most people, when they're going to meet somebody for the first time, and you're emailing back and forth or you're texting, and you say, I'll be at the coffee shop at 5, I'm about 5 feet tall. I've got dark hair. I'll be wearing a red sweater, right? The assumption is I'm white and I'm all of those things. So when I email somebody or text somebody, I always say I'm the white woman with dark hair and a white sweater. But I had to teach myself that, right? That wasn't my norm. And I think that that's just an example of when we think about an anti-racist education, we have to look for those things which center whiteness without that we don't even see. I call it the hand you don't see. It's very easy for us to pick out the obvious. I won't even give you some of the terrible examples that we see, all over the internet. It's much harder for us to focus on the student that doesn't get called on, the story that doesn't include or that has a certain narrative that gets perpetuated over and over again. And I think it's those subtle things that they clearly have an effect, right? And I think there's also this history we don't teach that makes it sound like this is a problem of the past. And so to me, an anti-racist education provides not only the space for these discussions, it provides language for these discussions. It talks about the relevance. Heather McGhee has a wonderful, wonderful book out right now. I recommend it to everybody. It's called The Sum of Us. And it talks about not only the toll of racism on people of color, but the toll of racism on white people. It costs all of us. And so I think that needs to be the discussion. And to me, an anti-racist education has that holistic lens. And yeah, let's talk about the hijacking of critical race theory, shall we? Let's be clear. What is critical race theory? By the way, I'm talking with my hands, so I'm passionate. A brilliant lawyer in the 1960s by the name of Derek Bell created critical race theory as a narrow practice of legal study to address some of the complexities that were happening at the time of the lawsuits around segregation in education. It is a very narrow area of focus in the legal field. As like my sister said, pretty much only PhDs should be talking about critical race theory. I mean, obviously everyone could talk about it, but it is not what is being taught in our schools. What is being taught in our schools is this thing called history. Yeah, that's what it is. It's history. And one of the very interesting things we get asked a lot, because at BU, obviously, Miriam Aschkenasy has this huge program on anti-racism, and we love it. But people say, oh, well, BU has this program. Why do you need your program? And we say, well, BU has an English department. Does Harvard still need to have an English department? And this is how we need to think about this, right? So to me, this is the hijacking of critical race theory is a way to fearmonger. It is a way to derail the conversation. It is a way to keep us from actually going back and teaching history the way it actually happened. So this isn't revisionist history. This is correcting revisionist history. And that is different from critical race theory. That's the long answer.
Great answer. Great answer. So then going to the second part, how does institutional racism impact students?
I think, again, it is this hand you don't see, right? It is the everyday. I think all kids code switch. I mean, I think everybody code switch, but I think kids of color have to spend a lot more time code switching. I think that there are a lot more consequences for them if they don't code switch adequately. For those of you who don't know, code switching is where you kind of behave one way. Imagine that your child is with their friends and how they behave. And then when they come home and how they behave with you is very different, right? They're code switching to adjust to their environment. I think that the problem with institutional racism is we don't understand it. and we still don't understand it, right? We know, for instance, in Brookline, the numbers just came out again. We know there's this gap with Black and Brown students, this educational gap, and we're trying to address it, and yet we don't even understand it. We don't understand where it's coming from, and I don't have a simple answer except to say that I don't think we're looking deep enough and how we center our educational priorities, how we think about what we teach in the classroom, um, and how we support our students thinking out of the box. And I don't have a solution, only to say that I don't think we're doing enough power analysis. We still spend a lot of time thinking about bias. We still look at kind of superficial policies and practices rather than a more power analysis centered view.
Great. What can adults and professionals do to support this type of work to help students?
So we just got to get out of the students' way. I mean, frankly, I think that the coming generations are better at this than we are. They're having these conversations that I didn't have until I was in my 30s and 40s. They are smarter about it. They are living it already much more acutely because of the internet, because of social media. Um, I think we need to let the students lead more, frankly. But at the same time, as adults, I think we need to focus on the power, right? Because that's where I think the missing link is. We do have the power, and that's why I say we have to do some sort of power analysis, and then we have to figure out how to flip the script so that the students themselves have more power to guide these discussions in the way that is most supportive and fruitful for them.
Well, thank you so much for answering my questions. That was great.
Yeah, now it's my turn to ask you, right?
Yeah.
I love it. So we're talking about institutional structures versus individual bias. So I would love to hear from you. What impacted you in high school and college? Like, did you feel these institutional structures? How did that play out in your own personal experience?
Yeah. Well, I touched on it a little bit in high school, especially being a young man of color. It definitely put this kind of otherness on me and people of the same group. And it went as far as having to take a complete separate history class called the African American Latino Scholars Program. And although it was great to be in an environment that recognized you, that went above and beyond to teach you such important things about not just your history, but history as it happened, it also, in a way, help feed my own feelings into being the other, being the person that has to be in this room to learn what is being advertised as history in my classrooms. And that wasn't just limited to my actual education, what I was learning in terms of books and such, but it also went as far as, and I know they're not. The exact same thing, but I feel like they aren't mutually exclusive. It lended in that the inherent financial disparities as a young Black man in Brookline that really helped me, that really opened my eyes to the fact that I'm in these institutions and I'm expected to kind of abide by these institutions and learn what is told to me is important. But then there's this whole other side of it that that's kept from me. It feels like it's not even in coincidental. We're just not covering that in class. It's kind of like a you cannot learn this thing because it's going to unlock all these things. And I didn't have these feelings until I got to college and I started really doing my own research and meeting people of the same mindset that I was like, wow, I feel like I was held back, like put in metaphorical chains in terms of my education, and even just in a broader scheme when applying to colleges. Touching back on the inherent financial disparities, you have to pay to apply to college. You have to pay to visit the institutions that you want to go to, and those things just will ward off many students who look like me, many students who were maybe even in worse financial situations than me, to chase these things, to chase this American dream, so that we've all heard. And it starts looking like a pipe dream, because if you can't even apply to college or afford to visit the school that you want to go to, or choose between sending in your application and helping out the family how you should or would want to, you start seeing and start feeling that very clearly, institutionally, you are not being set up to succeed. And in going into what it takes to get into college, they want you to be a model student and do all these incredible things, but it's not so wide reaching as that every student can fit this mold. And it became very clear that as a Black and brown student, you were expected to almost go above and beyond while also doing the bare minimum that you could already, that you're already struggling to reach. And so that was kind of my experience when I was finally getting towards the latter stage of my high school career and entering college. I started really seeing um, the support that I didn't have just in the broader scheme of institutions and schooling.
So thank you for that. That's so interesting, and that really connects to what we were talking about teaching history and understanding history. But it
Yeah,
should be for everybody, right? It shouldn't
yeah,
just be for the scholar students.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so then, how do you call people into these conversations? And when do you decide to call them in? And why wouldn't you? And why when would you say to the school, "Hey, why isn't everybody learning this?"
Right. I kind of just call to my experiences when it comes to pulling people into the conversation. Um, I I would talk about how I come from. I'm the youngest of 10 children. I'm living in this town that Brookline's very much so a supportive town, but it always feels like there was a catch to it. And so I would very blatantly talk about my experiences and let people into the conversation, so that, like you were saying, it should be steps. African American and Latino scholars should have been for everyone, because it's something that everyone could have learned from. Something that everyone could have benefited from. And I feel like that's the same sentiment when it comes to someone like me, just talking about their experiences and voicing how going through such institutions have affected them. You really get a chance to reflect on why you yourself feel that you were failed by institution, and you get to sit with that, and you then bring that to the table in the broader scheme. It's coming back to these panels and speaking about my experience. It's about um, accepting to have a mentor, accepting to be a mentor, stuff like that. You really have to be open to wanting people to learn about you, and not come from a place of like, well, I've been wronged, I've been failed, so these are the things you need to know about how you can necessarily do better. But it's about the human element of it. There's a person behind these struggles, and they go further than just um, my place in school. And so just bringing people into the conversation, having an open conversation, and really letting people know that yes, you may understand where I'm coming from. You may be able to recognize my struggles, but can you relate as it is to you?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Michelle. And tell me something, as a recent graduate, what would if you got to go back, and this is a continuation of that discussion, if you got to go back and say, hey, this is something you need to do better, what advice would you give academics and professionals working in academic institutions? And what anti-racist practices would you say, listen, you need to think about doing this, or this is what you should be doing?
Yeah, I would teach Black and brown folks about financial situations, because now being out in the real world adulting, there are so many things that I wish I knew, and there were so many of my counterparts that had these teachings at home, who had these people who were connected in those worlds and can tell you how a 401k works, and how getting a mortgage works and stuff like that. So I would love to see a world where Black and brown people are learning that stuff from middle school to high school, so that when they get to college, you're really you're you're not just playing catch up. And when it comes to college, there are so many college professors I had that, quite frankly, just need to check themselves. They really just needed to sit with their own long-lived privileges and see, not just see, but truly understand where a student could be coming from. Really understand the unique and sometimes fragile situations that students are living in the times that we're especially living in now, but just in general, and really sitting with how their own experiences either are aiding or destroying certain, opportunities for other people, or just inherently giving this sort of um, leg not what's the opposite of leg up, leg down, disadvantage to other students. And so I would say, just really check yourself. If you are a professor, if you're someone who is in these institutions, make sure you're really understanding that you know what you're talking about, that you're not just going into it blindly, and that you're more than just an ally and more than just someone who sees and understands, but you are putting yourself in those shoes, and you're really trying to live the experience in the way that applies to you, so that you can come back and do good.
That was awesome. Uh, I think we're turning it over to Juan now.
Yeah, thank you all. That was amazing. Yeah, there's so many things that I resonated with. I think Michelle, when you're talking about, the struggles you're facing, and how to open up to others, but also feeling like some shame and some burden about that, like I think oftentimes it's hard to ask for help. But when people engage you, when they tell you, "Hey, we want to help you," like, you're not a burden to us. I think there's a little bit of a switch that happens there, and hopefully we can do that with more youth and families. Um, but I will make sure to look some. We have some questions for you all. So I know from to Miriam, can you talk about specific anti-racist practices schools can or should be implementing?
Well, so I don't know that there's no, let me rephrase that. There is no magic bullet. I think that's really important. I think each school has to look at itself. I think there's obvious low hanging fruit. Having teachers and staff that reflect the student body is really important. Um, and that's not just Black and brown students, it's Asian and Southeast Asian. Having a diverse teaching staff, um, which is possible. Don't tell me about the pipeline. Those teachers are out there. You have to find them. I think, again, what Michée was talking about and what I was talking about, which is the idea of Black History Month, Latinx History Month, like that's a real. I actually find that problematic, because this history is American history, and it should be rolled all together in our history education. It shouldn't. It's great if you want to use that month to further highlight important people and events, but this should be, every month, a part of our regular education. And so looking carefully at the curriculum to make sure it's inclusive, that it's accurate, that we're not glossing over really important parts of our history that have historically been written by those in power who didn't want to talk about those parts of our history. I think that's really an important part of an anti-racist education. I think creating space for discussions about social justice. Calling people into conversations rather than calling them out, I think, is a much more effective way. Again, when I say to people, I'm letting you know I'm a racist. I try to be anti-racist every day. To me, that's a calling in. Let's have a conversation where we're not accusing each other, but we're listening. And so, giving really specifically talking to kids and giving them language to talk about those things, I think is really important. And frankly, and this may, I don't know how this is going to over, but getting rid of programs like school resource officer programs, which, really the data is quite clear, are not benefiting students of color, right? This is the opposite, talking about disadvantage. Getting rid of punitive disciplinary policies, those things actually really impact how our students feel safe at school. I'm going to cite a statistic. I think it's probably 5 or 6 years old now, but 5 or 6 years ago, the Federal Department of Education did a massive evaluation of data, and they identified the number one most suspended group of students. This is throughout the United States. And what was alarming is it was Black kindergarten girls, right? And there is a very distinct and disturbing message there that those girls are getting, right? And so it's actually, to me, we can't have anti-racist education without looking at that kind of data and saying, why is that happening? What is that message? So there's no magic bullet. There's no one program you could bring in. I think every school has to look at how it's approaching teaching, and really look and see where they can be actively anti-racist.
Thank you, Miriam. Yeah, I know something like you mentioned, the school resource officers. I know in some charter schools in Boston, there's a lot of like dean of students, and those are usually the folks who are, at, that have to do the punitive enforcement, and oftentimes those folks are also folks of color, and kind of an interesting dynamic, I always thought. But I know this year we in Brookline public schools, they've started adding and incorporating more school adjustment counselors, essentially social workers, to work with students, and we've been able to uh, really make sure that they are able to prioritize our step students, who oftentimes come from a background that they've incurred a lot of trauma in their history, so wanting to make sure that they're supported. So there's some steps in the right directions, and I think that's one of the ways that we can do that. And um, we were very proud as well that an alum, Jeff Pierre, is one of those counselors. So he's helping out because he knows exactly what it takes. But just really really happy about that. Very quickly, another book that might be useful, especially with different histories and that type of thing, is A Different Mirror: A History of Multicultural America. It's a book by Roland Takaki. Great book about its history, but the minority perspective. So in case people are interested, it's pretty long, but I always go back to it. All
I'm
right,
going to recommend one more book too.
do it.
Glenn Singleton's Courageous Conversations About Race.
There you go. Thank you. All right. Next up for Michée. So, what was your experience in the African American Latino Scholars Program, and do you have any suggestions on how to improve the program itself?
I had a great experience in Afro and Latino Scholars Program because it, like I said, was a space in a predominantly white campus that taught you the things that your run-of-the-mill history teacher maybe either isn't allowed. I don't know why they wouldn't be allowed, but or just doesn't touch on. It was such a space where you walk in and people look like you. People come from the same socioeconomic background as you, and you are touching on really, really um, hard to hear and hard to learn subjects, but um, things that you probably would never hear otherwise. And the teacher, Dr. Chris Vick, he was amazing in not sugarcoating the world we're living in and the things that are inherently put on us and expected of us. And I love that perspective, the aspect of it especially. I love being able to learn things that I myself never even thought. Having my world shattered day after day in terms of education was such a great takeaway. On the other hand, though, it did really further push that feeling of otherness. And although this space was created for me and created to teach me about a history that I'm very heavily a part of, and to dictate the future that I want to be a part of, when I stepped out of that space, it made it very clear that this is the one space where it feels like I can exist. And that was such a huge shock, because you have this program that you love, that you feel like you're getting a lot of, but then when you leave that space, it's like going back to reality. And you realize, like, is this a reality that's beneficial or not? And then you start second guessing the program itself. And that's something I really struggled with when I was still a scholar at Brookline. And so with that said, I would say the best way to improve scholars is to just not even call it an African American Latino history class, and just call it a history class. Integrate it into the curriculum any way necessary, so that you're not just leaving this space where you feel supported. If you're leaving this space where you feel like you're learning about yourself and about the people who look like you, and then entering another space where you, like Miriam said, code switch and really change up how you're thinking, change up how you're acting, so that you can better integrate into the space. So I definitely feel like integrating a program like Afro-Am Latino Scholars into just a run-of-the-mill curriculum. Every day you go to class, you're learning about this history. That would really help students who are in the program feel a sense of all around, all encompassing support, but also teach something really critical to students who don't have access to that program. Because I know there are so many of my white colleagues who would have loved to be in that program, but didn't get the chance to, rather because they were uncomfortable, or uh, because they were already in a history class. So I just feel like really integrating it would make the most sense of anything.
Thank you. Um, yeah, I feel you on that. That it's a tricky balance to hit with that, right? Where it's a program that's kind of like an affinity space, but also like a teaching space for students and youth to learn more about their history and their backgrounds and where they come from. So in one way, it's it's like kind of a safeguard, but in another way, it's you can almost feel like stigmatized, right? Where like, oh, you're in this program, like, oh, like, da, da, da. So it's but they offer support, they offer resources and education, and I think I know similar to Steps, where a place that offers resources, but also for especially at the high school level, we hear from students and youth that there's a little bit of a stigma attached to that, and how do we convert that into something of pride, something that they're proud to be in. It's probably more of a systemic issue, obviously, and something more community wide. It's not necessarily Brookline specific or Massachusetts specific, but just something to think about. And when I in high school in South Texas, I was in the migrant club because I was a migrant, and even then, with 95% of the students being Mexican or Mexican American, there was still a stigma against me because not everybody was a migrant. And they provided a bunch of resources and opportunities, and books, and I love books, so I was happy with that. And they paid for college applications. And, going to Judy's question about Steps also helps with college apps, visits, and other things. Michelle, what do you think would be another way that we could help students that are coming up in making their college journey less difficult?
Well, the thing that I've been in steps since I was in fourth grade, but I didn't really learn how to appreciate steps to the level that I appreciate steps now until I got to college. And the college initiative program honestly changed my life, because it provided me with so many resources and so much encouragement when it comes to figuring out what you want to do, setting yourself up, and really recognizing all these things you have done and all these wonderful accomplishments, and wrapping it up in a way that you can continue to grow. And so I think just continuing to fortify the after high school stage of people's lives will make a tremendous difference. Like I said, teaching things like 401ks, things like that. You can still learn those stuff in college. And so having things, the college initiatives has definitely been one of those things where I appreciated the most out of steps. And I feel like while in high school, especially early on early on in high school, like freshman, sophomore year, having things that you can, spaces where you are outside of school, kind of experiencing, because although we are all brown and black students, we still lived very different experiences. So something that I was going through doesn't mean that necessarily the my colleague was going through it. So just stepping outside of the campus and really being immersed in the world would help students just really see themselves and see others and really relate to not just their black and brown colleagues, but also their white counterparts and such people.
Thank you, Michelle. All right, I said that was the last question, but we got one more right under the time limit. So, and again for you, Michelle. So, what or who or where were the most affirming spaces or people for you at the high school and at UMass as a student of color? And would do you, or if you do have ideas, how to expand these and allow for more students of color and even other people to have access and feel like they belong?
I was a club man when I got to college. I joined as many clubs that had to do with my interests as possible. And I feel like if there were even more clubs that piqued my interest or like aligned with who I think I am, I would have joined even more. And had there been clubs in high school that helped me, feel supported or feel like I'm in a safe space, I would have also joined those. So we, I don't know if we can go around just making clubs, but I feel like having those spaces is not necessarily um, a curriculum or isn't necessarily a curated educational space, but one where you can just go and be amongst each other. That really helped me. It helped me understand, like I just said, not just where I was coming from, but where someone else who may have been in a tougher situation, someone living a slightly different experience than me, could express themselves without any kind of judgment, without any kind of maybe not even looking for advice, just kind of letting you know this is what I go through on a daily basis, so that you can really sit with maybe your own sense of privilege that you didn't realize that you had, and explore those kind of parts of it. And what's the second part of the question?
Just ideas on how to expand these spaces, but I think you pretty much hit
Yeah,
it. Like trying to have more institutional support for these types of programs. Like
yeah,
you're about to say, I think like with curriculum having some sort of structure where
yeah,
people can create these spaces and get support. Because I mean, it's one thing to create them, but if it's not like validated or supported by the school or wherever you are, it's not going to go anywhere, honestly. So I think
exactly.
that's the biggest part of it too.
Yeah, and the
Right, yeah.
takeaway from that could be that you create these spaces on your own, and then you, the student, can then do with that what you will. Bring it into the learning space, bring it to other people, but it is your space that you make and that you curate and that you're able to design.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you once again to everyone. Thank you to Michelle, to Miriam, to everyone who was able to make it today to our forum. And without supporters like you, we wouldn't be able to do this. And we'll have some closing remarks from Rachel Goodman, our board chair.
Thank you all very much. I'll be brief because I know the hour is getting late, but again, I'd like everyone to join me in a virtual round of applause for our speakers. Miriam and Michée, you've really
raised some very interesting questions. And I also want to thank Juan and also Kenny Wild, who is the chair of our development committee. I want to thank Tom, who, as always, is right there making sure that the tech aspects of events like this are working smoothly. Want to acknowledge again the support of Wegmans for this evening's event. And I want to really, really thank the members of the STEPS board, the development committee, and everyone who was here this evening, because you all are really, your support and interest in the work that STEPS is doing is so important. I want to acknowledge that we have a number of our STEPS staff here this evening as well. This is exactly a year ago, we had our first SEAS forum. And just as a year ago, this evening, we've heard some really interesting and some provocative things. I would encourage everyone who is here to follow along. If you have ideas about other topics for future SEAS forums, please feel free to reach out to myself or to Tom, myself or to Juan, and Tom is going to put our contact information in the chat. If there are other people in your circle who you think might be interested in becoming a SEAS member, please have them get their contact information to us as well. And be on the lookout. Our impact report is going to be coming to you in the mail in just a couple of weeks. So with that, I want to again thank you all so much and have a very good evening.